And in the second case, it's just a lot of firefighting. So far, so good. Am I painting a picture of kind of what we saw? So this is what we observed. So we wanted to go out and test that. So we wanted to test the theory. So our goal here was we benchmarked 98 organizations in the last 3 years, and we got a phenomenal response given that the early version of the survey took like 3 hours to do. There are 97 mandatory questions, 97 optional questions. We got a good span of organizations. The average size of the organization of IT organizations was about 483. Average IT budget was about 114 million. Broad range of industries. I was thrilled with this. I mean, it turns out we could make some very decisive findings because of this range of demographics. Note that kind of finance and insurance, which includes banks, wasn't the majority of them. So I'll show you how we used that demographic split to kind of negate some often crazy claims about why people don't need to be secure or why people don't need to be efficient. So let me show you, before I go into the methodology, I'm going to share with you the two big surprises that came out of the survey, the benchmark. Surprise number one was there existed high performers. Well, that wasn't a surprise, but the surprise was how much better the high performers were than your typical IT organization. Right? What we found was that the 13% of respondents that were benchmarked had 8 times as many projects completed, 4.5 times as many application and software platforms under management. They were 4.5 times more services under management. They were implementing and authorizing 7 times as many changes. When they made the changes, they had 1/2 the change failure rate, 1/4 the fixed failure rate, 5 times higher service sysadmin ratios, and also 3 times higher budgets as a function of, it's not revenue, it's operating expense. It's like, wow. That's interesting, right? I mean, why? In the lean manufacturing world, they found a factor of 2x difference between high and low, right? 1/2, 1/2, 1/2, 1/2. What this is showing is that in the IT world, the difference between high and not high is 5 to 8x, right? So that means high performers are significantly outperforming, their peers. The other kind of surprise here is this last point. IT budget is 3 times higher. There's kind of two conjectures here, right? One is high performers are high performers because they have more money, but I find the other argument to be far more persuasive, which is that IT has 2 jobs: deliver new projects to the business, operate and maintain what you have. Low performers can't do either, right? And so how easy is it to get more budget if you are profoundly failing at those 2 things, right? You can't get anything approved, big or small, right? So high performers earn the right to spend more money and get more budget. How am I doing? Is this making sense? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? So, your lack of questions, I'll take lack of questions as disbelief or even hostility. So please, ask your questions. Yes?
Obviously, I think you have considered the size of the organization.
Yep.
That factor has been normalized.
Yeah, everything's been normalized. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Have you considered the possibility that they have a higher budget, they can consequently hire better employees? More talented employees?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's kind of 2 sides of that argument, right? One is, we're destined to be low performers because we can never hire the best employees. But I think the more reasonable argument is like, hey, no, we're just doing, there's smart people everywhere, but we're just doing the wrong things or doing the right things wrong, right? So I think there's just a lot of evidence out there in the manufacturing world that says, demographically, well, actually, we can probably boil it down to turnover. The people are better because they stay longer, right? Which is what we're going to prove out in the next one. Yeah.
Survey sample, did you say that the 98 companies that returned the surveys were, those are the only ones who actually finished it and the others just didn't complete it?
It is low. Yeah, it was a long survey.
But so this group is self-selecting.
It is to a certain self-selecting, but we found was that if you compare the people who took it first, the high completion rates and the low completion rates, the questions they didn't answer were intermingled. It wasn't like they gave up. I think all of them, if you take a look at the distribution of unanswered questions, it was because they didn't know. But yeah, there is a self-selecting bias in there. Absolutely.
Do you think it would make the differences even more dramatic?
Yeah, actually, that's good. You're right. It would probably even amplify the differences. Let me go to next. Oh, actually, one more other thing that I think is interesting. When I've been briefing the high performers on this, to a T, each one of the high performers love this because they said, you know what? We get accused by the business of costing too much. You cost more than your peers. You gold plate everything. You never want to be nimble, right? And what they found was that we're giving them the language to say, oh, no, you're getting something really valuable in exchange for the for the dollars that you're spending, right? More projects, better quality, more security, right? And so what we found is that we're giving them a language to say, hey, this is what you're getting in exchange for us being high performers. But it's not only just operational measures; it's security measures as well. What we found was that when high performers have a security breach, right, and we all might have security breaches, loss events are 1/5 as likely to result in a security breaches are 1/5 as likely to turn into a loss event, reputational loss, financial loss, whatever loss, however they defined it, right? They're almost 1/5 as likely to have that breach detected by an automated control versus like a customer or a newspaper or a vendor, right? In other words, they kept it inside the family, right, as opposed to having someone else say, oh, by the way, I just noticed that blah 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 is missing, right? And mean time to detect in the high performers measured in minutes versus hours in the medium performers and days or even weeks for the low performers. Right, so isn't it interesting that this seems to also validate that what's good for security is good for operations and vice versa, right? And also we found that high performers also spend 3 times more on security as well. So again, are they high performers because they spend more money? I know a lot of people who have money, but they're not high performers, right? It's how well do you spend it, and can you show value on a day-to-day basis? Okay, the second big surprise is represented in this graph. So the goal of the survey is really to link controls with performance, right? Controls, performance. And what we found was that we said, of the 318 COPIT controls, we selected 63 that fit 6 ITIL process areas of access, change, configuration management, release management, service level management, and resolution. And we said, we found that the Pareto principle does apply. You don't have to do all of them. 21 of them are what we call foundational controls that have the majority of the effect. But wouldn't it be interesting if there were a set of controls that every high performer had and every medium and low performer did not have? In other words, are there a small handful of controls that's universally present in high and universally absent in medium and low? Wouldn't that be interesting? And there were 2. How do you read this graph? What this graph shows on the right is each pi wedge, it's a polar vector diagram. Each one of those pi wedges is a foundational control. And you can see that they fit in the access control areas, change, configuration, release, service level management, resolution. The size of the pi wedge is what percentage of the high-performing cluster had that control, right? And the dark line is what percentage of medium performers had that control. And so what we want to do is find what was most different. And you see that change in configuration management are typically where you find the biggest differences. But there were 2 that had this characteristic of universal present in high, universally present absent in medium and low. And that was, do you monitor a system for unauthorized change? And the second one said, are there defined consequences for intentional unauthorized change? So they say the goal of science is to explain the most amount of observable phenomena with the fewest number of principles, confirm deeply held insights, confirm deeply held intuitions and reveal surprising insights. In my opinion, kind of this is what achieves that, right? I mean, these kind of findings achieve that because, like, wow, why is it that, when you hold these 2 controls up against the light, I see a culture of change management, right? I see a tone at the top that says this is important, right? As well, and also it's so important that we can't just manage by belief or by the honor system. We have to manage by fact. We have to put automated controls in place to make sure that people actually follow the policy. And it also says that this is what kind of discriminates high performers from low performers and medium performers. In other words, statisticians say a discriminant quality is when you have these things where just by looking at those 2 things, it's almost 100% accurate predictor of whether someone's in the high performer category or not. So far, so good. How am I doing? Maybe make one observation before we go into the methodology. Talking with Larissa beforehand, we were talking about, it's interesting that security has typically hung their hat on